gaze at those, you'll find that some of them are less than pristine, and with a little bit of perseverance, they will turn into something a little more presentable, and in some cases you'd think they just came out of the factory. So a great deal of pleasure has gone into changing slide A to slide B. Got a mixture of things to talk about by way of techniques. I'm just going to start with an application for artist paint. Now, artist paint is incredibly versatile. You go to Bunnings, a little pot will cost you $15 or something like that. It's much better to have a variety of artist paints. Now, for a start, black is very useful for doing the edge of 3-ply. I do not like seeing a radio that's restored and you can see the edge of a ply. There's no sense in leaving it like that. The manufacturer never did. And the one that's shown there is a pie, and I did use a Texticolour for that one because it's easy. But I could have used a sable hair brush with some black paint. Why a sable hair brush? Well, if you pay your $10 for a good brush, you can tell the difference instantly. A normal brush is scraggly, you get a rough edge. But if you pay your money for a good brush, it ends up with a quality job. So there's the black one. And that particular one I bought at Aldi. And if you go to Aldi at the right time, you can find a whole range of these creative brand paints. They're 100 mils, and they cost $1 each. The very most useful ones are the white, black and red up there. But at $1 each, you may as well grab some others because they always find an application somewhere or other. And most of you know that Aldi was started in Germany. In fact, it started in 1966 with two brothers whose name was Albrecht. So they put Albrecht and discount together, or discount, and came up with Albrecht discount, and so that is Aldi. I'm sure that most of you go surfing the middle lane in Aldi shops to see what's going. An amazing variety of things you can get there. So pick up some paints next time they're going through. Also, you can go to a discount shop and end up with Montmartre brand selection of acrylic paints. You can't always get the variety you want from just one or two, but if you get a set, you'll always find that some of them will do the job you want. And I'm going to illustrate that very shortly. If you look carefully here, you'll see there's veneer missing just on the bottom corner of the STC, and there's veneer missing down on the bottom of this AWA. You might intuitively think you go and get a piece of veneer and glue it in. Well, that's not a very clever thing to do because it never matches. If you've got a small bit there, you use a completely different approach, or I do. Now, why people store old radios in hen sheds, I have no idea. But it results in a challenging set of things. On eBay, I bought this off a farmer from mid-Victoria. They were sold as a group. And why it's got bird poo on it, I really don't know. But these were quite a challenge. All of those were eventually restored. Even that frame you see there, which is a veal mantle, I restored by building in a whole background for it. But let's look at that Breville on the side. Rescued from a farm, 1948. This is a very good set. It's got an RF section. It's got an 8-inch Magnavox speaker in it, and when it was restored, it's a very good radio. So it started off looking tatty, like so, and ended up quite attractively, and I wrote that one up for Silicon Chip some time ago. Always interesting when you take something off and you find all this rubbish there, and you wonder what the mice have eaten and various other low life forms that have digested your radio. But this one cleaned up remarkably well, and I'll share you the result later. But what about the cabinet? Well, you can see here the veneer peeling on the right-hand side top. First step, PVA glue, clamps, and get the veneer back in. But the veneer is tatty, and there are a number of places where the veneer just isn't there. Two-part epoxy car filler. always known as bog in the trade, but we'll call it epoxy just to be polite. So you pack the epoxy in, making sure that it's proud. You don't have to be neat, because all you're doing is determining how much work you put in to the wet and dry paper that comes afterwards to get it back smooth. Now, you can do the thought experiment and see just a pink bit of plastic filling in where all those holes were. So how does that pink bit of plastic turn into what you see on the right-hand side there? It looks like the real McCoy. And the answer to that is paint. What you do is you put on, after you've got it smooth and everything is in line, one coat of polyurethane. And you need that one coat because that brings out the true colour. And then you go to your paint set, you get your browns and your blacks, and the black is the most critical of the lot, because as you can see, the grains of the walnut come along and you can just continue them. And if you continue it in the right sort of way, you can't tell the difference between that and painted bits of epoxy. And it comes out looking like that. I needed 4 different shades of brown and black to make that come true. And here's another view of it. So look at the top. See the back right-hand corner? I know when I tried it on Michael Justin, he said, "I don't believe you." It looks so good. So it can come out. So if you've got perseverance, small bits of veneer, don't try to match it with any veneer. It's not going to work. Reconstruct it and paint it in to look good. Of course, after the first lot, you polyurethane over it, spray. If it doesn't look right, you fiddle it again. And so you keep going between the layers until it looks like that. So it doesn't have to be right first time. You can keep adjusting. A previously shared fill with 2-part epoxy with you was this radio here. It's an Echo, a gondola, and a piece of aluminium underneath as a former. But gravity is a real problem because it takes about 10 minutes until the epoxy is firm. In that 10 minutes, it runs with gravity. And because of that, I needed to do that in 3 goes to get it to fill in. You put a temporary barrier in it so gravity will fill the right area. And then you get back and you sand it back and it ends up looking like that. But aluminium underneath it isn't always the best solution. And here's a reconstruction of a 517M. Looks quite spectacularly realistic, but it started life looking like that. Now, because it was the base, I wanted the base to be firm, and I took a completely different approach. I could have stuck some aluminium in there, but that's not how I approached this one. I reached for my lot of MDF and used some thin MDF. I cut grooves in it to match where those feet were in it, then sanded it back, glued it in, of course. And as you can see on the right-hand side there inside, the way I formed it up was to get a drink can, bit of tape, I stuck a drink can in the corner, and then just overfill from the outside with a 2-part epoxy, and then reach for an angle grinder. Angle grinders are very good for the first lot of work. And then you have to use successive lots of wet and dry to get it back right. But that one ended up with the profile looking pretty good, and I only needed to do 1 application of the epoxy. You'll also see on the inside there that there's a bit which is not epoxy filled. That was done later, so it was all solid by the end of it. I'm sure most of you have got feet in your drawers at home, which are either felt or rubber. I've got quite a selection, so depending on the radio, I look in, get the size right, the type right, and in this case, I stuck 2 long felt strips underneath the radio. Felt's good because it doesn't abrade against things. Rubber's good too. Just another thing I did with this radio was tissy up the labels on it. And this is how I did it. This was done in PowerPoint. There's what I wanted the labels, Model 517 Aerial Earth Tone on. And I also created that Arts and P in PowerPoint. That is not a photograph, I created that one because I wanted it to, all the text to be readable. And there's surprisingly few Arts and P which are good enough to really start with and be convincing. So I made that one. And with a bit of trickery, you can reverse it using PowerPoint. If you really want to know how, I'll tell you separately, but There you go. And this is a bit of a show and tell too. And why do you reverse it? Because when you print it, the toner is on the top. Now, the toner is rather dull. It's also very scratchable. And I don't care if you destroy this one. What you see here is a print, and at the top you can read it, and if you turn it over, you now read the bottom in the right sense. And more than that, what's on top of that is just the cellulose, the celluloid, the acetate sheet. And that you can't scratch off the lettering, and it's got a nice gloss to it too. So play with that, and it's a neat trick to print it in reverse and then turn it around and you get labels. Glue stick. I think I've got one illustrating later. So here's the final one, and you see those labels here across, and that's the Arts and P, and they are all transparencies reversed so that you get the clear side on the front. Looks quite fine. Okay, that's the end of that one for restorations. A little bit about my Scharnberg Strauss. And I did write this up for Radio Waves back in 2018, so if you think you've seen it, you may have seen it. A recommendation, there's a lot of good stuff in old Radio Waves, so if you find yourself having a coffee at 10 o'clock at night and nothing better to do, reach for some old Radio Waves. You'll amaze yourself at what you've forgotten is in those good old Radio Waves. Scharnberg Strauss. They were made by a man called Ernest Smith in Adelaide. Now, his company was called Ern Smiths, and Scharnberg Strauss, he started building them in the early 1930s. And why Scharnberg Strauss? They're built in Adelaide by an Australian, because he wanted people to think it was quality German radios that he was selling. And he had a grand piano called a Scharnberg piano, and he thought he'd Germanified it even more by adding Strauss to it, just arbitrarily. And he stuck an eagle in the middle so that people would think they were buying a German radio. But not so, they were just built in Adelaide. The speaker in this one is an 8-inch speaker, and it's behind those slots in the plastic dial that you see there. What did Ernest Smith claim about this? He said it was beautifully figured walnut, logical speaker location, and an extra large 8-inch roller speaker, and a permanent sapphire stylus. I have a Chrysler from the same era, much the same sort of radio, which has got an old magnetic pickup cartridge which takes steel needles exactly the same as a gramophone, and they wear out after about 10 playings. And contemporary with that, people were still using steel needles from gramophones. Unthinkable almost, but this one was with a sapphire. And the way that they make the pickup when you had the sapphire cartridge was with what's called Rochelle salt sodium potassium tartrate hydrate. Now, if you get any of these old crystal pickup ones, 90% of them don't work. And there's a very simple reason for it. The crystal is a hydrate, but over the years it dehydrates and becomes a powder. When you vibrate a powder, you get absolutely no electrical output, and that's why they don't work. So those Rochelle salts, they were taken over in the 1950s by ceramic materials. So you know the standard ceramic input for a lot of old amplifiers. They were quite different. They weren't Rochelle salts. They were a ceramic material, and they do last. So for 45 guineas in the good old days, you got that combination radiogram. It was a project that lasted in my attic, in my ceiling space, for some years, until my wife told me to clear the ceiling, so out it came. And that's what it started off looking like. You can see the bottom of the record player bit there. You can see the rust creeping over the far right-hand side. And initially, I wasn't all that enthusiastic. It just got into the queue. The top of it, you see a lot of rust here. Now, if you look at the speaker very carefully, you might think you're looking at the speaker cone. Look more carefully, you're looking at the dial. there is nothing of the speaker. In fact, it took me several months to find an 8-inch speaker. You go to our shows, you find 12-inch speakers, a ton of them. 5 ton of 6-inch and 5-inch and 4-inch. It took me months to find a good 8-inch speaker. They're rarer than you think, but I did find one. Oh, the original speaker transformer 2 was open circuit. That was a bit of a pain. Really weird. There are 2 chokes on this. You can see 1, 2. The second choke was open circuit, and of all the crazy things, it was in the screen circuit of the IF amplifier. I've never seen it before, probably never see it again, but it had 2 chokes in it for filtering the power supply. In the end, the one that was open circuit, I replaced with a 1K resistor. But you can see the rust that's in it. That's the top. Now I'm going to show you the bottom. Bottom. It was a mice nest, and in between laying out little mice, the mother mouse also chewed random components and redecorated the whole area. So there were quite a number of nibbled components underneath there, along with the mess. Just to remind you here, there's a speaker cloth again over the front, and that will become relevant shortly. I have gates and a clothesline, a rotary clothesline, which I paint from time to time with Wattle Kilrust gloss enamel in Brunswick green. So I had this on my shelf, and so I thought to myself, Kilrust, I have a rusty chassis. The 2 were made for each other, and so they did get together. And here we go. Well, first off, you remove everything that's reasonably removable, and then you start with various grades, starting with 80 grit. I start with 80 very coarse, wet and dry, then move down as I can. And at the end, you've got a somewhat cleaner chassis, but then you paint it. And the important thing here is to paint it by hand, not spray. There are so many things to mask, and it's such a complicated thing. You get your paintbrush out, dip in, and paint what you can by hand. And the power transformer is painted in chrome by hand again. And in the end, it looks halfway reasonable. Next, to show you the front. Now, where the speaker grill cloth goes around is a bit rough on the whole thing, but there you see what the mice left. Just the last little bit they didn't get around the corner by the very inside of the cone. So you rarely run into ones. Surprisingly, you're dead right. I could have run the thing with that. That's right, it vibrates at the right speed. In fact, the high frequency is probably even better because it's not retarded by the rest of the cone. So they do sort of buzz. Ormond.
You were talking about the rust on the chassis. A very easy way to deal with those situations is take everything off that's practical, plug some old dead valves in the valve sockets, and just get a hand sandblasting gun in a sandblast canvas.
That is something I hadn't thought of to use.
A lot easier than a lot of hand rubbing.
Yeah, an old valve as a mask. I had not thought of that. Thanks, Ormond.
26 CM5, they block up valve sockets very well.
Right, so some suicide valves and go for it with a blast. That underneath, which was chewed by rodents, I did keep a few rodent-chewed capacitors because they were still serviceable. But in the end, it looked rather neat underneath, and there's a 1K power resistor that's there, replaced the choke which was open circuit, and the radio did come up and worked extremely well with the replacement 8-inch speaker. And there's the replacement 8-inch speaker. It didn't have a roller sticker on it. I like my speakers to have stickers on it, so I've got a batch of printouts of various labels. This one's an 8H, so there it goes. And that was the end of the project. And as you can see from what you see at the back, it looks rather respectable in green. It's not true to original, but it overcomes the rust and looks quite presentable. So you also see here the cut down version. I threw the record player away, cut it in half, used the lid of the record player to make the top, and there you have a radio which will fit on a shelf, which is a big advantage over the radiogram, which will not fit on a shelf. So it all works out.
But it won't play a record.
No one in their right mind would want to play a record with that rubbishy old turntable anyway. So people come to me and they want their record player restored, and I give them a hard time and say, you're not really going to play records if I do restore it, because I hate working on those darn things. The rubber's perished and there are 10 other mechanical things go wrong with them. So I almost always talk people out of restoring those record players.
Well, Rock and Roll Festival's on in Ararat this weekend, and one of the shops had some Edison diamond discs hanging in the window as a display. And I walked in and I said, you didn't get rock and roll on those.
No, you certainly didn't. Anyway, Little Nipper Model 6452 looks modestly resplendent in red there, and Mike Justin asked me what colour red I used. It comes from either Repco or Autobahn, and it's branded Motor Pro. It's their cheap stuff, and it's called Gloss Red, so you can't go too far wrong. Motor Pro Gloss Red, it's less than $10, and you end up with this sort of result. How did that one start? It was a mini auction, and it looked like that. Why had someone covered it with that vinyl? Because it had 2 cracks in the top, it had a complete piece missing on the side, and the initial thing would be to take it off, but I knew it would stick. It'd be a dreadful job to get the stuff off. It was put there to cover the cracks, so I left it there. We'll see what happened with it, so that's that. By now you can recognise 2-part epoxy. There it is, just whacked into the side. See that rough edge there? I left it as a rough edge because the next thing was to come along with an angle grinder and just get it back to plumb. Very easy to do. And also, just it matched perfectly. What did I use to do it? I just put a bit of tape over the outside and then filled to the back, and that's how that came about, then surfacing with a bit of abrasive as we go through. Now, it was still pretty rough, and for large bits to bog, I used primer putty. Now, it takes several applications, and this is only in the early stages of fixing this. As you can see, there's all sorts of gaps and things over the place. So eventually, you put enough primer putty onto it, enough undercoat, and sanding down in between time, you get to a nice base. Now, when I'm having a brilliant colour, I always use a white undercoat, because it makes the final colour far more brilliant. So which one is it? Emoleum. It's one you get from Bunnings. You can get it in either white or black as an undercoat. For colours, I always choose the white because the result at the end is so much better. A slight diversion to take you back where I've already been. The GIMP image manipulation program. It's a free download from the internet, and Ian Batty's just starting to think about using this one. I can do miracles with GIMP, but there is no such thing as an easy image manipulation program. You have to learn the hard way for all of them. But here's something rather trivial and easy, which is a good starting exercise. There is a Monarch radio. You can trim off the back using the lasso tool. So the back's gone, the background, and the contrast and brightness have been adjusted to get a better picture. So even if the illumination wasn't right first off, you can fiddle with an image manipulation program and get a better result. This is relevant because in our little nipper that we're looking at here, the way that I did things, I was going to destroy the tag inside which tells you the valve layout. So what I did was took a photograph of it and then used the image manipulation program to straighten it out, and eventually I was able to clean it up and it looked like that. So what I can do is make a reproduction of it to stick back at the end, and you see there the reproduction going back. You can see how poor the original one is, so with GIMP you're able to clean it up and get something looking like that. Here's another example of that in which I've used both the GIMP and PowerPoint to recreate what was in the corner of this Model 209 HMV. Very nice radio, that one, extremely nice sound. But on the back, as you can see from that blue arrow there, you have the valve layout and a few things telling you to reverse the connections to minimise the hum, and other things there. So don't change valves before switching off, etc. And there's the layout. It's a combination of a scan and redoing the typing in PowerPoint. So that's another example there. And this is an introduction to a bloke called Glenn Orris. Glenn Orris is ringing bells here. People, yeah. He's a member of the HRSA, lives in New South Wales, and he's decided his retirement project is to take all the valve layouts he can find, all the speaker decals that he can find, and in the web page, Vintage Radio Buy Sell Trade, how many people are members of that particular group? Yeah, good. It's recommended. I saw, John, you applied only last week to get onto it, so yeah. There's a wealth of chat, and what you find if you look up where it says, where am I? Media, you follow underneath, and the last one there is albums, and you find Glenn Orris, and these are albums of albums, and the far left-hand top here says valve socket diagrams for HMV. And so you've got a whole range underneath those. You see the idea, and if you look up HMV, you find this. Now, why did I do it when Glenn's got them up there? Well, Glenn's only just started doing it. So if you want one of these, look it up. You might find and save yourself the trouble because Glenn's already done it. You see there on the right-hand side, the one that I did. Immediately left is the one that Glenn did. And in some ways, I think he did a better job than I did. I hate to admit it. So they're all there at a high level. He didn't do such a good job of the one that we're here, the nipper. You'll notice I scanned this and it's got this little detail here. Glenn got lazy and didn't put that in, so I'll take mine over his for that one. But they're all there and they're all serviceable. And the result. So here's the back and the front of that one. It all turned out, I nearly brought it along today. It's very credible and you wouldn't know it was done over that vinyl stuff. But the original grill, and this is very common on these little nippers, had gone flaky. The paint drops off the back. You can use chrome paint for the silver ones, and I used cream paint for this one, and it turned out much better than the original. That's painted cream in the back, and that restores that flakiness of it. The back of that one, the Arts and P is another paste on. And also, again, the speaker there, an EMI reproduction sticker going on. It looks just so much better than the bare metal sticking out the back on the speaker. And now for something entirely different, which you've all been waiting for, whether you knew it or not. What to do with a toothless Reisler radio. Yeah. And there are a number of ways you can approach this. One simple way is to get a sacrificial case, knock the teeth out of one and put them into another. That's particularly useful for the plum puddings. The plum puddings have got ridges on them, and if you knock all the teeth out of one and just make it a toothless one entirely, you keep the teeth and put them into the next one that comes along. But in this case, I didn't knock teeth out, I replaced them, and you'll see how I did it. And the trick is, always look in your bits bin and see what you've got. And what I had was a bit of tongue. Many of you will recognise this from flooring. And what you can see in there is 2 lots of ribbing for Chrysler radios. Because if you cut them in the right place, you end up with 2 series with a nice rounded profile on the top. So you see here where I've got indication of cut, you cut through there. This gives you long strips of just the right thickness. And for the ordinary grill on the top, you just match them in. Of course, you've got to file down the base flat so that you can get a nice butting joint. The top's easy, but what about the side? Well, this material is very heat deformable. So you take an overlength bit, form it on some pipe, which is the right radius for the job, and let it cool, and then you just snip it in to the right length to match the other teeth that are missing. And in the end, you end up with a completely toothed Model 11.7 Chrysler. On the bottom here, you can see that rear grille, and after I painted it from the outside. You can still see the yellow underneath, but no one's going to inspect it to see the yellow there. That's just to show you how it was done and convince you that I really did use that yellow toothing material. And there's the final result that you see like that. Now, it says Chrysler. Because of the photographic conditions, that one above it initially there, you can see the remnants of an old K and the Chrysler. You clean it up and you reach for your hookup wire. If you look through all of your red hookup wire, or all the scrappy things which are under a chassis, you're eventually going to find the right colour red and the right thickness, and you can just snip it out, and that required 2 bits to make the K, one for the vertical and one for the K bit there, and then a bit of super glue, put it in, and you have a Chrysler restored from your Chrysler. At first glance, you really can't tell it unless you know what you're looking for. So it's a matter of choosing your red wire carefully. Red, red, red. Another red project. These are 401 Healings, very popular, and they sell for all sorts of prices on eBay, even over $300, extremely popular. So I acquired one which was a project. And why was it a project? Looks okay, doesn't it? But if you look at the side, in fact, I think it was Ray Gillette that sold me this one. And ever the salesman, he insisted on a premium because this was a specially ventilated model. So I got stuck into this one, and it wasn't factory painted. I've shown you the back of the grille there. The person who painted it, I think, did lots of painting at various times, and it was really crude. And it took me 3 rounds of conventional paint remover to strip it back to look like that. So that was a starting point there. Mind you, that's still got a gaping hole in the side, but at least it's clean and we can get started on our resurrection. And in this case, I had a cassette, and a front-loading cassette. Through the 80s, the whole pile of these, the rubber band went bang and the cassette's completely useless. So what's left in it? A power transformer and the top metal sheet of the tape recorder. So you take the top metal sheet, cut a bit out of it, and you'll notice that this one's got a profiled rear, and it also tucks in underneath. So that works out, and you've just glued it in. That's pretty crude. So how do you get it to match? Again, reach for the 2-part epoxy, and you end up with this, a little bit more fiddling, a lot of undercoating, and eventually you end up with that one. So that's how it looks in the end. And Michael was looking at it at the Sandown show and admiring it.
I nearly bought it, actually.
Nearly bought it. Well, we'll have a chat afterwards. There we go. And I did write this one up back in 2014, so it's a while ago that I did that restoration, along with an article on other Healings as well. Now, every now and again you need a bit of plastic, so always keep a plastic bin with all those bits that you might otherwise have thrown away. Keep a range of types, sizes, colours, and you never know when a bit is going to be useful. And the last talk I gave, which was June last year, I did illustrate this hot point here with a grill missing. And they look so ugly when they've got just one grill bit missing, and it's never going to be right. So I took a bit of plastic which I'd already used to make some washers out of, cut a bit off, and also those grill bits are wedge shaped. They're thin at the leading edge and thick at the back. So I profiled a bit of that just with a file, then cut it to the right size, stuck it in, paint matched it, and there was a grill. Here's another one which I've done, but this time, well, that's the final result there, that bantam you see there. If you look at the grill, you may be able to very carefully find out where there's a replacement grill piece, but I'll show it to you anyway. It's right there in the middle, and what I did was looking through my plastics bin, found a bit of brown plastic, which was in fact a battery cover to an old tape recorder, and the brown was very, very close to what was required. And in this case, I didn't file off the ends. I simply cut the piece and matched it to where the join's in. That at least meant that you had a factory join on at the edge. So glue it in, and a little bit of black just to cover over the glue that was there. Black, you can put black on anything and people never notice it. So it all matches in and eventually looked very good. There's another one that Michael thought was a good job. Here's one that I brought along, the real thing today, an Astor Porter. I was given this after I went up to Shepparton to buy an eBay radio that I'd bought, and went up to Shepparton to collect it. And the bloke said, "I've got this here, do you want to take it away?" And I didn't really know what it was. It was a box with one side missing, and eventually I worked out it was an Astor Porter, and I rebuilt it. And you see what's around the side there, that pinstriping is in fact school textbook lining material from our kids that was left over from school days, and that makes the pattern that goes around it. It was some years afterwards that I in fact bought a real Porter, which is shown there in the bottom right. But when I first restored it, that grill bit stayed absent for a couple of years, and it just annoyed me. So I eventually cut a bit out, exactly the same as I showed you for that Bantam, and matched it. And if you want to see the result, it's right there. So looking at it just on the table, you'll say the grill's intact, but you can come up and see exactly where it's been glued in by matching, and it's not too bad. At a first glance, the grill has been restored. So remember that spare bin of plastic bits and have a look. Here's a bit of an oddity, and it's exactly that, an oddity. When I first joined the HRSA in 2009, I'm a newbie relatively, the mini auction was fascinating to me because I was used to buying radios through eBay, and along came a mini auction, and I fell in love with this case. And so I paid $7, as I recall, for this case, and eventually rebuilt it. What happened to it? Well, there it is on the top left-hand corner. It's American, very obviously American. In fact, it's even the escutcheon there has got a New York company and a New York address written in it on the back, so it's American. And when I took it back to Bare Timber, someone had veneered this on the side, and what that veneer varnish was hiding was plain pine. I've never seen a more boring piece of wood. It was white pine, boring. So I thought I'll do something imaginative with it. I painted it black, as you can see there. And how to fill it with a working radio. Oh, this radio sits on my study desk. It's very convenient. I just reach up if I want the news, one click, and it's a transistorized replacement from a GE, which was an old cassette FM AM radio, which I chose to use because it had a radial dial. Now the dial was far too small for the job, but in the end, you can see it, I matched the size. How did I do that? Very simply, you take a photograph, you magnify it, print it, and make it part of the dial there. You'll also notice that the old one, the original one there, it's got the knobs at a very distant spacing, and the one that I got had 4 knob holes. What did I do with the knob holes? I will come to that in a moment. Here's a view of the back. So you can see that this is taken in the dark, so you can see the light illuminated around it. You can see on the 2 circuit boards on the side, that's where the knobs are, and they're multi-function knobs, and a quite sophisticated AM, FM transistor radio in the middle. But to the restoration of it, this is it sanded back and painted black. The grain on the side was so boring, I in fact ironed on some veneer. I really like doing that. You can get thermal treated veneers, which when you put an iron over them, the glue melts, it's heat glue, and it just sticks in. But that was still pretty boring, so I got the colour more in match using Cabot's Dark Oak. I love Cabot's Dark Oak. Depending on how much you put on, you can get all sorts of results. That's another radio I've restored with it down the bottom there. That's what Dark Oak ends up looking like. I also had some wooden plugs, which I put in the holes for the original, matched it to the orientation of the grain, then coated it with epoxy clear or polyurethane, and ended up with that as the result. Now, the purists are going to say this is all very unacceptable, but it looks marvellous. I'm very happy with it, and it's on my desk in my study. And it comes on instantly, no valve wake up, and it can do FM if ever I was interested in doing FM. And that's pretty well your lot for now, because if you want more, you can look up my personal website, which is hrsa2.com. A number of you have looked that up. You'll find my collection of 600 radios, some tape recorders, amplifiers, and a bit of other minor interesting bits are up on my site, hrsa2.com. So I welcome you to visit that one. And there is always an answer to your restoration, and that's my end. Thank you. Peter's all set to take your coffee orders and tea orders, and we'll sort out the mini auction. And so next event, mini auction, currently tea time.